Many of us have heard of the World Economics Forum's, their top 8 predictions for 2030. And their number one prediction was you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And so when I saw that on social media, as I often do, I'm kind of like, that's probably out of context, right? Because it's World Economic Forum is this group. It's the like global elite. It's got all of the politicians and business people. Like, there's no way that this group is actually predicting the end of private property like in a few years, right? That would be wrong. So in that particular case, it did not take very much research to find out, yes, it was sitting there right in the open. And then, as I've focused for a very long time on helping individuals, grow and retain wealth. And I know more than anything that wealth comes from ownership. And so if you don't have ownership, you have no opportunity to create wealth.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. If you like our work and want to support us, the best way to do that is join Phetasy.com. You'll get access to behind-the-scenes content, outtakes, discounts on merch, and the ability to submit questions for some of our upcoming guests. Support your favorite scrappy little internet heroes at Phetasy.com. I'm with Carol Roth. Everybody, welcome back to Walk-Ins Welcome.
So nice to see you, Bridget. It's been a hot minute since we've had an official conversation.
It has.
Excited to dive into some of the maybe slightly more serious topics than you and I usually discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all your books are pretty serious. Like, unfortunately, right over the target books that everyone's terrified to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to be a game show host. I just wanted to provide laughter and prizes to people, and somehow I just ended up scaring the living out of all of America.
Yeah, how did you end up with this topic, You Will Own Nothing, which is your most recent book?
So obviously, many of us have heard of the World Economics Forum's 2030 predictions, their top 8 predictions for 2030. And their number one prediction was you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And so when I saw that on social media, as I often do, I'm kind of like, that's probably out of context, right? Because it's World Economic Forum is this group. It's the like global elite. It's got all of the politicians and business people. Like, there's no way that this group is actually predicting the end of private property like in a few years, right? That would be wrong. So in that particular case, it did not take very much research to find out, yes, it was sitting there right in the open. And then, as I've focused for a very long time on helping individuals, grow and retain wealth. And I know more than anything that wealth comes from ownership, something that you and I have discussed many times, right? You own assets that hopefully retain value, even more hopefully appreciate in value. And so if you don't have ownership, you have no opportunity to create wealth. And when you look back in history, everybody who hasn't had property and hasn't had those, wealth creation opportunities, they have not only been very unfree, but they certainly haven't been happy if they've even been alive. So as I kind of start looking at all of these issues that were going on, they just kept coming back to this concept of you will own nothing, you will own nothing. And it's, against everything I stand for. So I want to make everybody own everything. So I thought it was an interesting way to kind of play off of that.
Is the idea of, let's say, property, is that pretty American? I feel like a lot of people in Europe don't have or own their property. They're pretty comfortable renting.
It's a really good question. Interestingly enough, the number one driver of household wealth in China is actually real estate and home ownership. Now, granted, it's different in China. You don't actually own the property. They do this weird lease back situation to you, which, by the way, is not that unlike the property tax situation that we have here in the
do
United
we
States.
really
And
own our
the
property?
illusion of ownership. So we can talk about that. But the idea of this sort of protection of property rights and the technology that allowed for trade really came from England. And they were the first ones to kind of recognize, okay, you can have property if you're not just the most elite king. And it changed the way that property was transmitted and wealth was transmitted. It used to be you're part of the aristocrats, and it would transmit down through inheritance, and then everybody else was a peasant. And then through protection of individual rights, including property rights, and technology that allowed for transmission of trade and innovation and all that kind of stuff, it started to get more horizontal instead of vertical. So now you and I could trade and gain wealth instead of just hoping that we were winning the genetic lottery and being born into the right family. So that concept that came from England was obviously something that the founding fathers thought was incredibly important, and enshrined that as a critical right in the Bill of Rights. And it stands as a part of capitalism, and that kind of idea of the ability to have ownership over something gives people the incentives to go out and take risks, because why would you take the risk if you didn't participate in that upside via ownership? You would just take the easy way out. So that really has lifted so many people out of poverty around the world over the past 50 to 70 years. And now, unfortunately, we're sort of hitting this inflection point where the global financial world order is changing a bit. Also something that sounds super conspiratorial, but isn't. And so with that, if you're the elite, do you sit back and go, well, stakes are shifting, I just hope it might work out for me? Or do you go, well, stakes are shifting, how do I jump on this, control everything possible, get my hands on every resource and make sure that me and my friends come out on top? You can choose your own adventure. You can guess which path that happens there.
So what do you mean by the stakes are shifting?
So one of the things that you may hear is that there is going to be this new world order or a new financial world order. And everyone's very keyed into the World Economic Forum's #1 prediction of you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. They sort of gloss over #2, which is the US will no longer be the world's sole superpower. Now, again, sounds conspiratorial. Maybe we're taking this out of context, but go on the White House's website, look up Joe Biden's comments from March 21st, 2022 to the Business Roundtable, which is the CEOs of all the major companies in the United States. And he says, this is something that happens every 3 to 4 generations. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. I'm pretty sure that we, as him and all of the CEOs in that room, probably not you and I, Bridget. But the reality is that this is something that happens on a regular basis. We are totally oblivious because we have lived through this incredibly prosperous time with the US at the pole position in the global economy. We have derived substantial benefits from that. And so we feel very invincible and go, well, it's always going to be like that. We're always going to be the center of the universe. So yeah, things may shift a little bit, but USA. But this is something that has changed many times throughout history. As I said, we've had about an 80-year run. Before us, it was the British. I would assume the British were sitting around going, well, darling, we're probably very invincible too. We'll always be at the center of the financial universe. And of course, they're not. And I can't do a Dutch accent, but it was the Dutch before them. And so, when you're in that position, you can't see anything else. It seems like nothing else could happen. But we're already seeing changes. We're already seeing changes in terms of the US being the world's reserve currency, and how that has sort of started to decrease from a central bank balance sheet perspective very rapidly. In fact, last year was at some accelerated pace that was exponentially higher than it had been for many, many years. And you have all of these emerging nations that are looking for ways to trade in their own currencies and get away from the stronghold of the dollar, because the Federal Reserve and the government have not done a real great job in sort of making sure that the dollar takes care of the people of the world, or frankly, the people of the US. Usually there's a fight between that as the reserve currency. You're either managing for global stability or domestic stability. Our Fed has managed to do neither. Congratulations, Jerome Powell, Janet Yellen, and everybody before them.
Yeah, it seems like, you hear these things like you own nothing, and it's become a meme at this point. It's you'll own nothing, you're going to eat bugs and live in pods. It does seem like a 4chan hoax. I can understand why people repeat the memes and laugh, but they don't really want to dig into whether or not that's true, because it feels like something that 4chan started to see if it could fool a bunch of people into believing. And when you actually go on the WEF and see this stuff, like you said, it's a conspiracy that's right out in the open, if it is one at all.
Yeah, it's a conspiracy. It's not a theory.
Right. And it's so, I feel like the term like elites and they and that also does so much kind of erasing of who is actually doing this, because it's hard to point at when you say elites. It's like, okay, what does that mean to the average person? That can mean a different thing for every person that you ask. So in your book, for instance, when you talk about the elites, who are you kind of referring to?
So I have 3 different groups that are coming at you from different directions. One of them, the call is coming from inside the house, the Fed and the government. So,
awesome.
We basically know, you don't have to go and think about, is this a conspiracy theory? Like, you just need to go to the grocery store or like try to rent a place or try to buy a place to know that, you may be doing all the right things. And it's really hard for you to get your hands on things or to have a financial level of stability to even be able to invest. So we know that the Federal Reserve and the government, has been working really hard to transfer wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. It's something we talked about in the last book, dive much deeper in this book, and we can get into some of the specific areas that it's impacting, including housing, particularly for first-time home buyers. So they're sort of the first group. The second group is what I call the sort of bad actors. And that's everybody from these non-governmental organizations or intergovernmental organizations in some cases, like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, as well as the CEOs of various big businesses. And, again, it sounds like, oh, well, are they really doing things? But as we look into like every single thing that we talk about in the book, like the same names keep popping up over and over again. BlackRock, the WEF, the UN. So like, I'll give you a couple of times in a row that's a coincidence. But when it's like 6 different things that I've looked into that are all disparate and the same people's names are coming up over and over again, seems like there might be at least somewhat of a coordinated effort for them to be working, together.
Right.
And then the third group is big tech. And, this is sort of a group that's some ways separate, but in some instances they collude with the others. And it's really fascinating because obviously technology has made our lives better in many ways. It has democratized access to various business opportunities and wealth creation opportunities for a lot of people. And so, throughout the first phases of these various industrial revolutions, everything was going great until sort of this last situation where you've got these big companies that are now almost infrastructure and they have oligopolies. Like if you think about your phone, you have 2 operating systems basically to choose from, right? You either use Apple or you use, the Alphabet operating system that's owned by Google. And that's it. Like they cover 99+% of not just the United States, the world. Right. So how much choice, like that's not capitalism. That's not like free choice. It's like one or the other. So what do I own in that instance? So like I've got my phone here and I've got, some plastic and some computer chips and glass. But if I don't have that operating system, if they say at any point in time, Carol, we don't like what you and Bridget said. You guys are too snarky and we want to, smack you around a little bit, or we don't like what you posted on Facebook, or the government told us that you ate too much meat last week and they're trying to, whatever it is. I don't own anything. Like I can't I can't get onto my phone, let alone access email, access payment systems, access social platforms, all the things that you need to participate in modern society. So there really is, across this digital infrastructure, this attempt first to kind of keep your life as a subscription or a service and rent it back to you. And there's also a scenario where, in many cases, they have become a de facto government, but they don't provide any of the rights that we have in, like, the Bill of Rights, because they're a quote unquote private company, even though there's no competition and no true capitalism there. So you've got three really powerful buckets of people. They're all coming at you from different directions, sometimes alone, sometimes they're coordinating together. So it's a lot of things that you really need to empower yourself with the knowledge about. And then also, I think amongst ourselves, decide which of us are best suited to kind of attack each of these things, because it's a lot, right? It's overwhelming. And then also just realize that the stakes are shifting, come to terms with it, and then set yourself up for success in doing whatever you can individually and in your community. Because one of the things that is very challenging, particularly in the financial realm, is timing. So we can see trajectories of things. You see this in the stock market all the time. You can see trajectories. God forbid you're a short seller and this company is just going to go down. It can go way up and crush you before it ultimately comes down and goes out of business. And if you don't know the timing on that, you can get absolutely wrecked. And so that's the issue here, is that we know the trajectory, whether this takes 12 months, 12 years, 50 years, we have no idea. But that doesn't mean that you don't do the preparation now, because if it is sooner versus later, you need to be prepared. And we want to push out that duration as long as possible. We may not be able to stop a new financial world order, because history dictates that they come on a regular basis. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we can benefit and preserve that American dream for as long as possible. And particularly for folks like you, Bridget, who have children, right?
Yeah.
And have that legacy, it becomes even more critically important to make sure that we preserve the American dream for her and her counterparts.
Yeah. What is the new financial world order? What does that look like?
So that is a matter of great debate. There are lots of very smart people who have come up with probably about a half a dozen different possible scenarios. It doesn't mean that the dollar and the US just goes away and dies, right? It just means that we don't hold that pole position. And it means that our life is very different. It means the government cannot finance debt as cheaply as it has in the past. And I don't think they're going to stop spending. So that means that you are going to be financing that either directly through taxes or indirectly as they continue to erode your purchasing power, as we've seen over the past few years. So there could be a situation where there are sort of a few different world powers and maybe even trading blocks. So it could be that we're aligned with the G7 nations and the BRICS are all aligned, and there's sort of these different blocks of individuals. There could be a scenario where there's, God forbid, a massive world war, and that completely resets the stakes on who's in charge, and who knows who comes out on top. One of the fascinating things that I found when I was doing the research was that not every war brings about a new financial world order, but every new financial world order has been preceded by war. That gives the players the ability to come together, to reset the table, to forgive debts, to decide what this is all going to look like. There could just be an abandoning of fiat currencies, and we could be going to something that looks like a more of a commodity based basket. Or, God forbid, there could be, some global centralized digital currency that comes into play. So, as I said, there's probably about a half a dozen different possible scenarios, but they're unless we shift things, unless we start getting our own debt under control, unless we put out leadership to the world where the world wants to trust us as a nation, not only financially, but just, operating in the global sphere, it's kind of hard to see where we're going to be able to retake sort of that glory that we've had over the past, the bulk of the past 80 years and continue that. It can be done. It can be done. But do we have the fortitude in our quote unquote leadership to be able to do that? And I'm looking at who's in the White House today. I'm looking at who's second in line. I'm looking at who's upcoming as a potential person to step into that in 2024. I'm not seeing that potential fortitude. So that means that we have more urgency individually to hedge our bets, so to speak.
Right. Can you explain for people who don't know what the BRICS are, and also commodity-based basket you mentioned? Just
Yes.
terms that I think are,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, not everybody always knows what they are.
Yeah, so the BRICS are considering sort of the emerging powers. It's Russia, India, China, South America, and now they're trying to bring in Saudi Arabia and some other countries, which we could talk about later, but is a big deal because the Saudis have always been very well aligned with the U.S. We provide them military, cover and spending and weapons and whatnot. And they agreed to let oil be priced in dollars around the world, and take the money that they got in dollars and plow that back into U.S. treasuries, which again allows the U.S. government to finance it at very cheap rates. So we had a real nice thing going with Saudi Arabia there for a long time. Now
They
China,
own everything.
Well, they own
I feel like
a lot
they
of things
own
because
everything.
because oil is like, I know that there are a lot of delusional folks out there not listening to your podcast, obviously, but certainly somehow they think that oil just isn't really important and isn't the lifeblood of human flourishing, as Alex Epstein likes to say, and it really is. So they have been very well rewarded for that. If you think about what's happening now, we have our country and all these, stupid allies that we have going, no, we need to go away from fossil fuels and go on this magical journey with green energy. And so if you're the Saudis, you're like, okay, they're trying to kill our business. Meanwhile, China is the largest net importer of oil. So they've already started making agreements where China is starting to be allowed to pay for oil in dollars, which is something that did not happen historically. This is something that has started to emerge over the last few years based on long-term decisions from the Fed over the past 15 years, but more urgently, things like the Biden administration not letting Russia have access to their reserves after they invaded Ukraine. So there's a lot of issues, but these BRICS countries are these emerging powers, lots of people, lots of growth opportunities, but they haven't quite gotten there yet. But they want to get there, right? They're trying really hard to get there, and so they're trying to come together and say, there's got to be a different way. We can't just let the U.S. run all over us, because look at what they've done, and we don't trust them. And again, it becomes a national security and a national economic issue for them when everything is priced in dollars. And now all of a sudden they need more dollars to be able to pay for food and oil for their people. This isn't them just being jerks. This is a real issue that we were supposed to take care of because we were the adults in the room, and the adults just said, forget about it. So the scary thing for me, Bridget, and we'll get into the basket of commodities in a second, but of these BRICS nations and them trying to do this thing, the scary thing is when we saw the turnover in the past in the new financial world order from the Dutch to the British and from the British to the US, there was always sort of this, kind of bastion of good opportunities and freedom that was waiting in the wings to step into that role. The countries that are like the most powerful and the most likely to potentially step in the role. Now, there are a lot of issues with them, but they're all bastions of tyranny, right? They're not freedom and ideas and like, oh, okay, well, here's like US 2.0. Like this is all moving in the wrong direction. So this is a very dark situation, not just for us here in the US, but really for the world in terms of, everything that's going on seems to be kind of putting a tide to push us backwards. So I'm going to ask you if you have any additional questions before I start running my mouth on baskets of currencies.
No, that's a great explanation. I think sometimes even I take for granted just certain things that I've learned along the way, and then I forget that not everybody knows all of the stuff. Especially you're so immersed in it; it's just second nature.
No, absolutely. It's important. And it's one of the things I think I've done a good job of in the book, which is sort of a hallmark of mine, is taking the big concepts and spending the time to break them down in a
Yes.
way that you can really understand them.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really is important. As we've talked about many times before, the folks who are the elites, the people who are in high finance, they don't want you to know this stuff. They
Right.
make it intentionally difficult. They use weird words and they make it opaque. Some of the things are even hard sometimes for me to understand. And they do that on purpose. The complexity makes it less likely that you're going to care and that you're going to stand up and that you're going to push back, and allows them to just roll all over us like a steamroller. And so it's why we really do need to understand these things and speak up about them and have the plan to fight back. So a basket of currencies or of commodities and currencies is just what it sounds like. That perhaps there is a international currency. There's already one that's not kind of public facing, but is being used for countries to settle between themselves with the International Monetary Fund, called special drawing rights, and that's
Mm-hmm.
based on the different currencies of each country. But it's always been proposed. In fact, it was proposed during Bretton Woods, which kind of set us up for the US to be in the pole position. It was ultimately rejected, that instead of just letting one country be in the pole position, that maybe the currency of the globe and global trade should be backed by things like gold and silver and oil. So, it's possible that you may see that emerge, and certainly those of us who are more into gold bugs and the like think that that's a real possibility. One of the things that we've seen with China is because people don't really trust their currency. I mean, they are a communist nation. CCP, it's in the name of their party. They don't have a real strong track record, so people don't want to be like, if you don't trust the US, you probably don't want to trust China's currency either. But they've been loading up on gold in their central bank, and they've been not backing their currency with gold like we did previously with the dollar before we went off the gold standard, but they're offering what Luke Grumman and some other folks call a credible physical settlement in gold. So that if you are worried, or that you want to kind of change your yuan or renminbi, which is a Chinese currency, into something, you're not trusting it, you don't want to hold a lot of that in reserves, and you do trade in that we're going to let you then change that into gold. And they have been stockpiling that to give more comfort to these nations to be able to do trade in their currency. So I think we've seen central banks around the world load up on gold. Last year was a record. First quarter was a Q1 record. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Part of it is just, for some stability based on what's going on with all the other currencies. But part of it is that may be part of a shift in the financial world order.
Yeah, it's funny. The gold thing is interesting because I see all the time when it feels like mostly right wing folks advertise gold, and I always see on like Twitter or online on the left people mocking everybody on the right for shilling gold and saying that it's such a griftery thing to do. And I wonder why that division exists and why that perception persists.
So I think that if you are somebody on the left, you have to believe in the delusion, right? You have to believe in unicorns that fart rainbows and, rainbow ice cream cones that come out their butts, because you can't possibly think that there's no consequences for all of the actions that the left has done and that the government, with the right has done, and all of these big spending plans that the left has pushed. So it kind of stands in opposition. Like gold and tangible metals are like a very reality based hedge. It's like, I think things aren't going to go great, and I have to make sure that if that happens, that I have at least part of my portfolio and a form factor that I can control, with a tangible metal that has a 5,000 plus year social contract and has some intrinsic value. But the mindset of it has always been, we don't trust the fiat currency, we don't trust paper money. It's interesting. I did for 4th of July some research on the founding fathers, and the founding fathers absolutely hated paper money, let alone fiat money, and they loved gold and silver because, like many of their prescient views, they saw all the ways things could be manipulated and bastardized. And so they really were kind of against that from the beginning. And so if you have that mentality about protecting rights and protecting value, of course, you're going to be more attracted to an asset class that has that kind of as part of its fundamental raison d'etre, so to speak. And if you're somebody who believes in fantasy, you're going to believe in some of these more fantastical kinds of scenarios. So I think that's kind of my best explanation on why there has been the split. Although, interestingly enough, over the last few years, we've seen some crossover, because the inflation that we saw in the asset classes, things like homes and the stock market and whatnot, then came into price inflation for everyday living and spending. And once that happened, and individuals who hadn't sort of seen that on the level that we've seen in 40 years went, oh wait, like this is a real thing. Now obviously many of them have identified the wrong reasons and whatnot, but there are enough people who started going, oh wait, like maybe these people who are talking about preserving your wealth and hedging actually know what they're talking about, because now I'm living it and experiencing it, and it's no longer a theoretical discussion point.
Yeah, it's always kind of funny to me. I feel like everything has become so culture war. It just seems like even the fact that gold has become a culture war thing is so revealing to me, because it feels like something that, well, everyone should like gold.
As I always say, there's three parties, right? There's the red party, the blue party, and the gold party. And the gold party spans everyone, because at the end of the day, we all need to pay our rent. When you go to pay for something, most of the time, they don't really care who you are and what your background is. They just need to get paid.
Yeah.
So I think it is something that is shifting. But you're right. The fact that money, it all gets dragged into any sort of separation. Nassim Taleb, who is this absolute genius, he wrote The Black Swan, and he's a professor, and he's got a hedge fund and all these interesting strategies. And he was on an interview recently, and he was talking about where people were starting to separate money, even like things like Bitcoin. It's like, oh, and the new folks are interested in this culturally, and he's like, money's not a cultural thing, right? It's how we exchange. It's unit of account. It's how we preserve value. So you can try and drag that into it, and certainly on the edges, things like social credit and cancel culture have dragged us in. And all of these things are tied back to you will own nothing, because they're preventing you from the opportunities to earn wealth. But the money in and of itself isn't, it doesn't sort of subscribe to a culture war. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about money, is that it seems like it doesn't have very much loyalty. It just
amen to that, sister.
I just always feel like, and that's something that's just kind of occurring to me as you were saying it, was this culture warifying of money does push us into a more, it's like the sinister conspiratorial part of me would say, well, this is actually how you grease the wheels for social credit, because now you are pushing people into even thinking about things like money that way. And you're seeing these weird, really chilling things that we've just kind of brushed off because they were like the wrong people. But from my perspective, banishing somebody from like the stuff that happened up in Canada with PayPal and the donations and all that
Freedom Convoy. Yeah, we talk
that's
about that in the book.
chilling.
Okay,
That
so well, let's bring in one of your friends who is not on the wrong side of things, which is Joe Rogan. So
mhm,
think about the cancel attempt, the several cancel attempts that happened against Joe Rogan when they didn't like what he was saying, they didn't like the
mhm,
people they were bringing onto his platform, and so they said, "We are going to go after you. We're going to go after your social standing. We're going to go after your existing job." That's not just trying to shut down his speech, that's shutting down his wealth creation opportunities. Now, fortunately for him, for Dave Chappelle, for some others who've gone through this, they are important enough to their partners and they have those good, tight, support systems where the support system said, this isn't happening. Like, nice try, but we're not going in that direction. But there are just as many other people that don't have that support system who have put themselves out there and have found themselves kicked off of social media platforms, have been deplatformed from PayPal, have lost their jobs, and all of these things: social standing, your opportunities for jobs, your actual job, and in the case of the Freedom Convoy, or in the businesses that were shut down during COVID, like your actual wealth,
yeah,
your wealth itself. And so this is where something that's starts out as cancel culture moves into non-formalized social credit, which the next step is formalized social credit. And then on the money side, potentially central bank digital currencies that would be owned and operated by the Federal Reserve that could enforce that social credit, which really takes this into a dystopian landscape.
yeah. And not to make this about me, but
But
I
let's make it
think,
about you.
but let's, because I feel like it is people at my level who, it's almost even worse than if I was getting deplatformed. I feel like they realize that by deplatforming people, it gives them more attention. It's like the Streisand effect. So now, and this is what Jacob Siegel and I were talking about on our last podcast, which is even more terrifying than what you write about somehow. And it makes you just invisible. So, but it cuts off all my pipeline. Like whatever's going on with Twitter is ridiculous and cuts me off from being able to market and attract an
Right.
audience. And that slows everything down. My YouTube just has some kind of invisibility cloak around it because I hit these tripwires, and so the algorithm doesn't, either know what to do with me or knows to just make me invisible. And people routinely tell me that they don't get notifications that I have a video out. All of these little things in a very competitive market where people are all
Right.
vying for your attention. If you're not even getting a notification from somebody, you're already hindered. And that cuts off opportunities. So I see the effect on my wallet. I can look at my books from even last year to this year, and it is scary because there's nothing really that I can do aside from drive around America and hand out flyers, which I might have to resort to.
Which I might be coming with you.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this offline. So I've actually done statistical analysis on this. I've shown you the what Bridget was just talking about in terms of the impressions and the followers and the visibility. This isn't just an anecdotal thing. There's numbers behind this. I charted, and I don't know if you were suppressed before Elon took over, but for the last couple of years before Elon took over, I was suppressed. So things were starting to go down. But since he took over, I was like, oh, it's going to get better. It has gotten so much worse. Like my impressions, like I would have months where I would have, well into the eight figures, 11, 20, 30 million impressions. Now it's down to 3 million impressions.
Yeah.
So think about the impact. I'm out there trying to promote a book. You're out there
Yeah.
trying to promote Dumpster Fire and your work. And just like you, people are saying they're not seeing it, but it's not just theoretical. Like I'm seeing the impressions. And then I'm also seeing that translate into followers. Like I would be picking up around 5,000 to 6,000 followers a month. And again, I have the data and the infographics to support this. Last month, I had negative 30. And
Yeah.
I have been on Twitter for more than a decade. My tweet patterns don't change.
Yeah.
So it can vary, but I've never, ever, ever had a negative month. And so, it just shows, and the impressions are kind of siloed to that. So it kind of shows what's happening in terms of the way they have changed their algorithms. And so it's really challenging for people. They're supposed to be supporting independent content creators, but it's not. And we've put a lot of time and effort into this, but we don't own our followings, Bridget. So we own nothing. We are at the whim and the mercy, and we have no sort of conduit to go and say, hey, this isn't fair. You're suppressing me, because again, we don't have any sort of recourse. There's no rights that are around that.
Yeah, this is why I don't really trust Elon, but then again, I don't generally trust mercurial billionaires. But because,
and by the way, he's also been the victim of some of this, like ESG. Like Tesla was thrown out of the S&P ESG ratings because he bought Twitter. They didn't like the free speech stuff.
Right.
So, basically, he and his shareholders have also been penalized by this whole sort of nebulous network that's going on, with the common denominator of trying to suppress our ownership, our rights, and our wealth creation opportunity.
But what he did with Substack makes me mad, because on Substack, you do own your following. That's one of the great things about Substack. Same with Locals. You get that subscriber list of people is yours. You want to detach from Stripe and take your following somewhere else, or build your own website, you have every right to do that, and they can come with you. And that's what's so different about it. And the fact that he's started suppressing Substack links and suppressing your ability to promote your Substack stuff is so frustrating and also revealing to me, because you should, if you're supportive of, he wants Twitter to be that, basically. So he sees it as competition, but it's still, he doesn't have a newsletter, function. So if you're someone who's allegedly for supporting creators and supporting the right to kind of own your following, I would think that those two things kind of would work in conjunction with one another. They used to.
I would kill it as like a C-level executive at Twitter, because I understand sort of community and content. And I do think it's a wrong decision. I don't know if it's his decision. I don't know what the story is, but the reality is that Twitter is supposed to be that place that you go to and you get your news. And it's okay to link out, because you always come back to Twitter to find out what's next.
It always comes back.
Right. It has that,
and Substack links, like you used to be able to embed tweets in Substack. Right. So it was like this whole ecosystem.
And you go down the web. Exactly. Yeah. So agreed. They need some content creators in there to give some feedback and help them sort it out. And hopefully they will. They will. But right now it is it's killing us. But it does speak to that larger issue, whether it's them making these decisions that suppress certain voices intentionally or non-intentionally. There aren't a lot of choices. This is no longer free market capitalism where there's 50 different places to go, or like you said, that you can just take your followers and up and go to this new place. There are all of these barriers in what is frankly infrastructure. And if you think about back in the day, for people who have who are old enough to remember when phones plugged in and had buttons and dials and things like that, and you would call your friends and their parents would answer, and you'd be like, "Hi, Mrs. So-and-so, can I talk to?" But basically back in the day, there was a law that said that as a phone company provider, since there were so few of them and they were critical infrastructure, that they had to provide service to anyone for any reason. So they
Right.
couldn't listen to our conversation and go, we don't like you two, so we're going to cut off your service. Oh, you're a criminal. As long as you paid your bills, like they weren't getting into who you are and what you were saying over that to make those decisions. And that's the shift that has happened now. And we don't have any rights protections in this sort of digital de facto government. And by the way, Bridget, think about how powerful these companies are. I mean, we've got companies that have more users than some of the biggest countries on this planet. We have companies that have market caps, and I know it's not a one-to-one comparison, but just for scope, they're larger than the GDP of almost every country on this planet. So it's the scope that they have and sort of the positioning that they have without this protection of rights is a big issue for us being able to retain ownership. They're all collecting fees. They're doing really well. They're collecting the rents, but it really does kind of create this, them and us kind of scenario that is not very reminiscent of capitalism.
This is something I go back and forth on, because then if you had them regulated like utilities, I don't necessarily trust the government, being what the government has been doing, to be in charge of this either, because that seems terrifying to me. The idea of now the government is in charge of the internet and what's allowed.
Yes, it's a really good point. I think there are two things I would say. One is I would prefer if the tech companies got together and these voices who said that they want to stand in service of, opportunities for everyone got together and created their own sort of digital rights that they are going to adhere to and allow for us to participate. I think they understand and we understand better, as you said, than the government, which if you've ever watched like a committee hearing with tech people and they're like, oh, so that interwebs thing is so interesting.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it is frightening.
Yeah.
Absent that, so I talked
you have
to
80-year-olds trying to understand what these. It's
literally
so
people
ridiculous.
who can't put a sentence together, who don't understand the internet, who are going to now all of a sudden regulate AI.
Yeah,
but
we're so fucked.
Ron Coleman, who is a phenomenal intermediary and protector of individual rights. He's done a lot of free speech work. He was the one who did took the Slants case, trademark case, all the way to the Supreme Court and won. He's just a great human being. I quoted him in the book, and we had a long discussion because obviously, he's a lawyer by background and he's very entrenched in this. And he basically said is, we're gonna get it wrong, but we need to start down the path and come up with something that we can at least work on and make those shifts, because not having anything puts us in an even worse scenario. And again, I'm a free market capitalist, I'm small government, but again, protection of our rights is fundamental. And when you have a situation that is not capitalism and looks like infrastructure, I do think that there is a role for something. And as I said, I'd rather technology just comes up and says, we're going to do this and we're going to create the standard, because they don't want to do that, because they want the government to regulate them, because it creates a moat around their business. It means no small businesses will ever be able to compete with them.
Right.
But if we do get to that point, I do think it's that, like, let's take a run and then let's modify it. Because the current situation, just the fact that, and obviously Elon's changed some of this with Twitter, but previous to that, there's no recourse, right? Or there was no way for you to come back. You get kicked off for a bunch of copyright violations because you posted doggy videos that had songs attached, and the people who owned the songs went, no, they can't do that. So instead of just like saying, hey, take that down, they give you a strike. And if you get 3 of those, you get kicked off of Twitter permanently. There's no way to even go and protest that. There's no path to get back on. If I were to go do something in the real world, I would have a trial. And if they found me guilty, I'd find a way to pay my debt back and come back to society, and not to downplay the difficulty of people who have been incarcerated coming back into society, but at least we've set up a path that we can work on. There's no path. Like, you're kicked off, you're in exile for the end to the end of time. There's no time frame on this.
There's this whole idea of depersoning someone, even
Right.
and how we've done this to people, and it's because we're okay with them because they might be, you know, on the fringes morally or whatever. But that's what's so funny is that whenever I have these conversations, even talking about like content creation or whatever we're talking about, people will be like, get a real job, stop whining. And I want to yell because I'm fighting for them. They might not be able to see it, but me, the people who are like you and are pushing back against this stuff, eventually this is all coming to your real job too, whatever you consider a real job. If you're working, go ask the truckers in Canada.
Go ask all the firemen and policemen and military people who lost their jobs because they wouldn't take vaccines.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, this is not like theoretical. This is something that's happened within the past few years here in the United States of America, and it's honestly the way that they get everything through. As we kind of like tie these different pieces back together of "You Will Own Nothing," they always sell it with somebody that you don't like, right? We're just going to go after the person you don't like, the wrong thinker, the billionaire, whoever it is. Like, you're going to just go after that person. And once you see that principle, then it gives them the latitude to come after you. One of the things I'm very, very frightened about, amongst the like 95 other things that we've talked about and will talk about, is that there is almost $85 trillion that is set to turn over voluntarily in this country in the next 23 years via inheritance. And most of that, the bulk of that, isn't the wealthy. That's average Americans' inheritances that are going to be passed down from grandparents and parents to their kids.
This is what everyone always says. They're like, the millennials, blah, blah. I'm like, because the boomers are all still alive. Just give it like 10 years. That's going to change.
There's more to it than that. But here's a way that they're going to try to basically cock block the millennials and Gen Z is cock block them out of their inheritances. So basically, you have the scenario where you have Yellen and Biden floating things like wealth taxes and inheritance taxes, unrealized capital gains, things that don't even exist in reality.
It's stealing.
Theft. Legalized plunder. And what they would like to do is, everybody hates the billionaires. I unfortunately learned that when the billionaires went down to go see the Titanic and, sadly perished. And this was a horrible thing for humanity, but apparently the entire internet thought that was really humorous. So apparently not a big fan club for them. But that's the envy politics that we have, where they're going to push this. So they're going to say, well, we're just going to do these wealth taxes or this unrealized capital gains tax or inheritance tax. It's just going to be for the billionaires or the billionaires and the ultra wealthy. And as soon as you cede, oh, okay, the government has the right to come in and take your private property, it's no longer about income tax, they can do whatever they want, you have lost the plot. And guess what? The billionaires, because they're all the friends, they're all part of the elite, and they have the lawyers and the accountants, and they're going to help write these laws. They're going to find the loopholes to put everything in these fancy trusts or whatever. And it's that almost $85 trillion that is set to be passed down via inheritance, as well as potentially your homes and your family businesses. Those are the things that they are going to go after because you had envy and you opened up that discussion. And I think that's why it's so important to empower people with this knowledge and let them understand what's happening and really get the lay of the land so that they're not tricked when that happens. And we know that people get tricked easily because look what happened with the stimulus checks. How many times did I go on TV, call whatever, and go, don't take the stimulus. Don't take the stimulus. It's a trick. You're going to end up paying thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in inflation every year for the rest of your lives because of it. No, that's not going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. It's math. That's how it works. So, that's exactly what happened.
Math is racist, Carol.
apparently math is delusional.
Hey, math is delusional and racist. I don't know if you missed that.
They took their Donnie dollars. They took their Biden bucks. look at me, I'm rich, bitch, whatever. And then that was it. Now, for the rest of their lives, they're going to be paying for that. And so you have to understand, in order to protect yourself, you have to understand where these threats are coming.
Yeah, there's so much in your book that is terrifying. I find that when I was writing my recent article about why Pride lost public, I ended up down the ESG rabbit hole. And because all things lead to ESG if you dig deep enough. And it is so complicated and terrifying, and yet right out in the open. But there's not an easy way to explain this to the average person, because it is, like you said, it's intentionally confusing.
Yes, it is in its very nature.
And so it's wrapped in like all this feel good stuff, like, environmentalism and like, social justice and we want diversity. And then it's like, yeah, except we're going to basically hold you hostage unless you do these things that we want you to do. And it's just a huge racketeering organization. It's crazy. It is.
So I have an entire chapter in the book on this to try to give people, some parameters. And I call ESG business social credit, because it's a bunch of these elite, and again, same people, BlackRock, World Economic Forum, UN, same people sitting around going, how do we get compliance? How do we get businesses to do the things we want them to do? How do we use other people's money to do it? It's basically like a hostage situation for these businesses using your money. And the reason why you can't define ESG other than environmental, social, and governance is because it's intentionally vague. Not only do they not want you to understand it, but they want to be able to change it. There's a war in Ukraine. Yes, weapons are part of ESG. There's not a war in the Ukraine. Guns are bad. They're not part, you know what I mean? Like, Amazon needs to fly a plane here. That's great. You need to fly your private jet. That's great. Commercial airlines. That's bad. So they just make it up as they go along, which makes it even more terrifying. And it's funny, in the days prior to us recording this, Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, who is the largest asset manager on the planet, who's one of the shepherds of ESG. He's one of the people who he's like the godfather, literally, of ESG, where he said in his shareholder letters, like, basically, you're with us or you're against us, and we're not going to vote for you if you're not doing the things that we want. And I have the shareholder letters in there. It's his own words. But he's real sad. He's big mad, Bridget, because people have figured out his ESG scam, both in terms of the bullying tactics as well as the fee extraction. And some of Ron DeSantis and some of the other AGs and treasurers and whatnot around the country has started to push back, and everyone's starting to get onto ESG. So he's no longer going to use the phrase ESG. It's just ESG he says is dead to him. It's become politicized. He's the one that politicized it, but let's just leave that to the side for a second. So he didn't say that he's not going to engage in ESG practices anymore. He just doesn't like the branding. And this is the same thing that happens with the World Economic Forum and the UN and all of these stupid ideas, is they just repackage them in a different way. So you will see, I think James Lindsay talked about conscientious capitalism. You're going to see things like impact investing and sustainability and sustainable investing. This is something I've been warning about for more than a year. So they're just they're not like mad that, this has gone in the wrong direction and is creating all of these horrible outcomes for companies, for your wealth, your pensions that are invested in these companies, and, moving us away from things like fossil fuels, which are important for us to be able to live robust lives. That's not what they're mad about. They're mad that you're onto the scam, so they're going to change language, and he just won't use ESG anymore.
Yeah, this is so let's take the last 10 minutes or so to figure out and I want people to go buy your book and read all of the solutions you suggest, but what are just some things, so we can leave this on a somewhat hopeful note? What are some of the things people can start to do to protect themselves against this or fight against this?
So I actually did a little Easter egg for you guys. So chapter 11, in financial terms, is a word that relates to bankruptcies, and it's when you lose your assets. But I took chapter 11 and I turned it into the own everything chapter, so that you have the ability to change your behaviors, including your financial behaviors, so that you can push back. And as you said, Bridget, there are a lot of things that we cover. We're talking about the social credit. We're talking about the Fed. We're talking about CBDCs. We're talking about ESG. We're talking about housing, and we didn't even get into corporations competing with you for housing and consolidating land and water rights, and all of these different
Yeah,
things.
you
So
can't
there's
grow your own food. It's like so crazy. All of
right,
it is
the
so crazy.
college wealth transfer, creating indentured so that there are all these different things that I cover throughout the book. And you have to first empower yourself with the knowledge, because it requires a different behavioral action. So something like CBDCs, let's take that for example. So central bank digital currencies, we alluded to it. It's basically when the Federal Reserve decides that they are going to issue the currency, but they have full transparency. So imagine that you have a dollar that has a tracking chip in it. And when you go to the store, they scan the tracking chip, and somebody's like monitoring you and go, I'm sorry, Bridget, too many burgers this month. We're trying to save the planet. You can't do that. Or, hey guys, inflation is bad. We need to curb spending. So none of you can buy anything. We're just cutting off access to all the money. These are real potential scenarios that could happen. So if a CBDC were to come into play, well, first of all, let's keep them from coming into play. They need to be approved by Congress. So there's been a lot of pushback. There are things that we can do actively to try to stop that from happening. But if it does happen, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in terms of hard assets? What are you going to do in terms of your community, in terms of possible barter arrangements, so
I'm
that you
going to
have the
move to
ability?
Idaho and shack up with all of the survivalists.
Right. I mean, but seriously, like, you need to be thinking about this now, because as we talked about, we don't know duration. Could be 12 months from now, could be 15 years, could be 50. We don't know. But at least you've come through and you've thought through that plan. And if it's something, if you're going to use, metals, that time is not the time for you to start investing in that. You need to start stockpiling and looking and getting smaller quantities. You don't want to be getting big bars of gold or huge bars of silver. You want to get little small ones, because nobody's going to be making change for you. So you need to kind of to think through those things. Pushing back against corporations buying houses. One of the things is obviously don't sell your house if you can to a corporation.
How is that legal, Carol? How?
How is it not legal? How is it like what, where is it that we should put up a restriction as to, who can buy a house? But you can make that choice. You can make that choice. Housing associations are pushing back. And what I would suggest, and what I offered in the book, is that you leave it to sort of a vote, because what you don't want to do is be in a situation where there's a bad situation and you've completely been so myopic about we don't want to sell it here that you screw yourself either. But we need to be thoughtful about these things. And oh, by the way, the reason why the corporations are doing this didn't exist before 2010. This was all because of Fed policy. So this is something that in the last 13 years happened. Now 1 in every 5 houses that's sold is sold to a big corporation. So again, little small things that we can do to change our behaviors, change the way that we walk through life. And hopefully as we get more people who are aware of these things, we can kind of divvy up and go, okay, I'm going to take the like crazy Fed stuff, and you're going to focus more on the stuff with the kids. And there are different roles for everybody that I think we can make a difference, because you got the biggest asset manager in the world now. People are onto his ESG scam, and so he's working to change that around. Like, it's not enough, but it's a good first step. And it does show that when we get together and we make a big deal about things and we get some action going, that it can have a difference. So this is meant to give you, at the end of the day, tools and optimism so that you can own everything, because they want you to own nothing, but I want you to own everything.
I don't think that corporations really like ESG either.
They don't understand it.
That's kind of my hope, is that as
they don't understand
as their customers push back against it, maybe they'll start to push back against that
They're
once
not
they
going to
try
be
and
happy
understand
if
it.
ESG, now that they've had to stick this all over their website and hire a bunch of people, if they have to go and rebrand this, they're not going to be happy. And the reality is they don't understand. They are the useful idiots in this equation. I have talked to CEOs and ESG professionals, including from publicly traded companies, who can't define ESG, don't know where it came from, and who've never heard of the World Economic Forum. So again, as we get more information out and some of these companies start going, this doesn't sound so great, it's going to be tough because there's a lot of capital that is trying to hold them hostage.
That
But
is where I love Elon being like, ESG is a scam. Like, good.
Because it affected him. If they can come after Elon, they can come after anyone. And so it is good to have these big, he's been a huge part of the solution here because he's been promoting it out. And now more people are going, oh, what is that? Why is Tesla not in the index, but ExxonMobil is? I thought you said fossil fuels were bad. I don't understand. Because it doesn't make sense. It's a fascist bullying, hostage taking tactic. It's not meant to make sense. So, hopefully people will be empowered by us continuing to have these discussions.
Oh, Carol Roth. Always a dark dystopian pleasure. How do you sleep? I mean, I know you sleep probably really well, but how do you, knowing what you know, how do you sleep at night?
So my dad, who was the ultimate character, who I've told you this many times before, he would have loved you, Bridget. And he was so funny. You would have loved him. Bernie had lots of wisdom. And Bernie always used to say, 100 years from now, none of this is going to mean shit.
Yeah.
So, you have to have that realistic perspective that I'm going to do everything I can. But at the end of the day, eventually I'll be gone and my kids will be gone. And we're trying to make the world a better place. And if we fail, it doesn't matter because we won't be here. I mean, it does matter, but you know what I'm saying. But I also think I use humor as a coping mechanism. A lot of times people will say, oh, I see you with Glenn Beck, I see you with Bridget, whatever. And you're laughing about these things. It's a coping mechanism, people. You use humor to diffuse the insane things in life. And I am, knock on wood, I'm so fortunate. I'm a very happy person. I go through the day just with gratitude and joy. We are living in the most prosperous time. And even though things are slipping away, like there are things that we can do. So it's a lot. It's overwhelming. We take a little piece. We don't try to take on the whole thing. We try to make, as much of a difference as we can. And at the end of the day, be good people, be in service of people, enjoy life. And, it doesn't mean that we don't note the seriousness of all this stuff and we don't try and act on it, but we also have to balance that with, not driving ourselves crazy. And, I'm very fortunate that I have the temperament to be able to do that. And I hope that, I wish that for everybody because it does good. I've said this many times before, like with, I've had a lot of death in my family, a lot of issues that I've gone through. We've talked about on previous podcasts. And like, you can sit in anticipation and just freak out about it. But like, once it happens, like you're going to have to deal with it anyway. So like, why waste all that time freaking out? I would rather be productive and try to do things to help change it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But just living in anticipation does nothing other than just eat away at your soul and your life. So, we can do this, with humor and, with our scalpels and axes and scythes and, whatever else, other tools, AR-15s and whatever other tools. Not that I'm saying we should be violent, peaceful protest, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Don't holler till you're hit. I love that. Yeah, I guess that's true. I laugh at it all too for similar reasons, just coping mechanism, but also I find mocking a lot of this stuff to be very powerful because we still can mock it. So
we live in a meme culture, right? Like
we do live in a meme culture,
right? That spreads information. We would, if people didn't make the joke out of you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, people wouldn't be onto it and people wouldn't be aware of it. And if you didn't talk about like the eating the bugs and not being able to eat that, like people wouldn't know about ESG. So yeah, sometimes it's just an effective way to communicate ideas and people are more receptive to it because they don't want to hear, the craziness, 24 hours a day. There's only so much you can
when
take.
when we got the house, some of the subscribers, the woman who makes all of our t-shirts and whatnot, Constance from Squid Print, if anyone
Yes,
needs
it's
a
amazing.
t-shirt
Yes.
company, she's the best. It's just a badass woman in general. But she sent us a onesie that said, "I poop on BlackRock."
Or maybe you poop black rocks. It depends.
It was
It depends on the
amazing.
day.
It was
But I will say,
perfect
so that's like a perfect example where
for the
like you
little
and I talked
baby.
about
My mother-in-law is like, "What is she wearing?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just her fighting the power."
But think about the change that you made, Bridget, from going to being a renter to going and taking that money and building equity in something. Like that's an important step. And yes, there are issues in property tax, we understand, but you are now in a different position in terms of setting yourself up for the future. And that's the kind of step that I wish for everybody. So,
Yeah, and we literally moved out of California so
correct.
we could take that step.
Right.
That's the other thing I would say to people is you live in America and we made that decision because it was well, theoretically, unless the government comes for everything, but it puts our daughter in a better position. So already she's in a better position just because we took ourselves out of a state where that was impossible, next to impossible for us, and came somewhere where I mean, that is something that we talk about when we're walking around the neighborhood here and the kids are riding bikes and they're yelling at each other like, "Oh, have a good vacation. I'll see you." It's just so cute. And if it still feels, and I've said this many times, like a place where the American dream is still possible. And I know that that's true in many states still in America. That might not be true in California anymore unless you're very wealthy. But it still feels that way. And I think my neighborhood is filled with immigrants as well. So Indians and Nigerians, and it's really diverse and really cool because it feels like like someone's opening an Indian market. I'm so excited about this. It feels like not only a place where the American dream is still possible, but people are coming from other countries who appreciate what America can do. And I'm so excited my daughter gets to be raised around that. And
they are the fiercest preservers of the American dream because they know what the other side of the coin is. So that is amazing. And I think a really good lesson for people is that you may have to change your situation in order to make sure that you're owning things and that you're preserving the American dream. But that is what this is all about. That's what I'm all about. This is preserving the American dream that I was able to seize, that other people were able to participate in. We have to preserve that for us and frankly for the world. We really do. We have that responsibility. So it's amazing. And I appreciate it. And, as we talk about books and buying your copy of You Will Own Nothing, buy a hard copy.
Yeah.
Because two reasons. One, it puts you in the habit of starting to own things. You need to change your mindset on that. But two, Jordan Peterson tweeted about this last night. There are books that they're starting to change.
Yeah.
And particularly as you have digital versions and these other versions
we see this with movies too. We're always like, buy physical media.
Buy it so that you have that record of what's said, because somebody's going to take this book. BlackRock's going to get a hold of this book and they're going to change it. And they're going to say, BlackRock is amazing. Klaus Schwab is a kind, benevolent man. He's totally not somebody out of central casting from a Bond movie in terms of a villain.
It's crazy.
He's great. And by the way, You Will Own Nothing. The second part of that is You'll Be Happy. They want you to buy into that happiness part of not owning anything. They want you to believe that it's for your benefit. The renting is so easy. So they're going to change it and they're going to go, and it's so convenient. You don't have to own anything. We'll take care of everything. They're trying to change the narrative, but we know the reality.
But it's so much easier too, because if you want to, there's already like and this is I know you have to go this could be a whole other
No,
conversation.
I'm here for you and your audience, Bridget.
That there's already such a push from the younger generation. They're very, and this is a piece I've wanted to work on or write, is this resistance to hustle culture. And there's like a resistance. You and I came of age during like the girl boss age. And if you go on TikTok, there's a whole anti-girl boss movement. And it's a whole movement towards, not hustling so much and more work-life balance. But I would say probably more life than work balance. And there's a sense of entitlement, a general sense of entitlement that I certainly didn't grow up with, that I see these younger generations growing up with, and also a sense that's probably correct of just maybe not making work your entire life.
Let me tell you something. I think it comes out of despair. I think that, they have these people who are telling them that, capitalism is bad and you're not going to be able to own a house. So they don't see the reason to do it because they're scared. They don't want to admit that there's a problem. So it's easier to just accept, oh, this is the way I'm trying to live my life, instead of really going for it and saying, no, I don't want to live my life like that. I want it to stretch for it. They don't understand the consequences. They're scared. They feel beaten down. People have been telling them that, they're not going to make it, or they're victims or whatever. And whatever you tell people, they're going to believe and they're going to live up to. So I think that that's a large piece of it too, which is why I think it's important to talk to people. And we also know that, when you're younger, you have kind of idealistic thoughts. And as you get older, it starts occurring to you that, oh yeah, maybe this isn't the way that I want to go. So there's probably some of that too, that they're going to grow into it. But, if we had the media talking about how attainable the American dream is and how exciting it is, rather than it's completely out of reach and you're never going to get it, and you have all this college debt because the government's a predatory lender and they've screwed you and transferred your wealth to college administrators, I think we would be having different discussions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Well, I always ask the same two questions. What is your biggest defect of character?
I have so many defects of character. It's really a good question. I think that my biggest defect of character right now is that I've gone from a place of like too much discipline. So I've tried to ease up on it, and I've probably gone to the other side of the equation. I need to pull back a little bit. I need a little bit more discipline in my life these days. So
you seem so disciplined to me.
Yeah, well, that's my best answer today. I know I've had other defects for previous ones, so I'm just trying to throw something different out there. I'm really physically messy. Maybe that's a good one. I'm like a piler, not a filer. So like if you saw there's papers like everywhere,
That's me right now.
Which is also the opposite of my personality. People think I'm super anal retentive, which I am about things, but physically I'm a disaster. So that's
my husband is like living with someone in the military, and my side of the bed looks like a teenager lives there. It's like, and even right now, I'm looking around at my desktop and just piles of paper everywhere, and this would make my husband insane.
Kurt has inbox 0 sometimes.
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
what's wrong with you?
So does Jaron.
What's
I'm like,
wrong with you?
Not only what's wrong with you, how are you married to me? Like, how does that not drive you insane?
I have inbox 12,372.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so that's
good balance.
Question.
What's your biggest asset other than your gold? Just kidding.
So I think that my biggest asset is really wanting to see other people succeed. Like I feel like there's a big karmic loop. Like I am very grateful for what I've been able to achieve, and I don't have a sort of restrictive mindset. Some people have that mentality where it's like, well, if I get it, there's not enough for anyone else. And I'm very much the opposite. Like I root for everybody's success, and do whatever I can to, help friends and strangers and whatnot. And I think that, is an asset to me because it allows me to move through the world, with more gratitude and appreciation. And I hope that it's an asset for other people, because I always do try to do whatever I can to lift other people up. So these days, I think that's probably my biggest asset.
Well, it's definitely been an asset to me because I've learned so much from you, and you are my
richness advisor.
My richness advisor. Yes. That's true. And I've taken a lot of your advice, when it came to, do I lease another car? Do I buy my car? I bought my car, just things like that, where I'm trying to just own more and more slowly over time, because I'm not by any means in the wealthy, where I just have so much money I don't know what to do with it, but I think I am working class, really, and realizing that there's still a lot I can do even there. Yeah. There are choices that I have to make, and I have to make sacrifices. And we did look at our budget, and we're like, all right, we want to put X amount towards paying down this and X amount. And so we just won't do Starbucks, or we'll do it once a month or whatever. It's just like stupid little things like that, but they do over time make a big difference.
It is so true. And just the ability to have that long-term vision, to be able to deny yourself something in the moment for more in the future. I mean, it's a predictor of success. I don't know if you've ever heard of the marshmallow test out of Stanford before.
Yeah.
Where they gave the little kids, they put a marshmallow in front of them and said, okay, we're going to leave the room and you can eat it now. But if you wait, if you have delayed gratification, if you wait till we come back and don't eat it, like, we'll give you 2 or 3 or whatever it was. And it was a predictor that the ones who were able to delay their gratification were more successful in life. So it's making these small tweaks early on. And we've talked about it before. It's something I've done myself when I came out of college like a million years ago and had $40,000 of college debt back all the way back then. I lived in a tiny little studio, a couple hundred square feet. It had a cardboard box with a sheet over it as my bedside table. And people like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it's like, I've got to pay down my debt. I've got to build up the nest egg.
Yeah.
And I've got to make these sacrifices today, because I don't want to be worried for the rest of my life. I want to make the sacrifices now and have the pain now for a short period of time, rather than having slightly less pain, but over very long durations. And so I think that's a huge financial lesson for everybody. If you can make it through and you can really go hard in that short period of time, it will really pay off for you in the long run.
Yeah, and I don't think people get very many financial lessons. The average person, I'm not sure, grows up with. Yeah,
it's intentional.
That rich man, poor man thing is very true.
It's intentional. There's a reason why they don't teach financial literacy in school. There's
high school.
There's a reason why they don't make it easy for you to buy a house. There's a reason why they don't make it easy for you to start a small business. If they wanted to.
I'll tell you, buying a house was one of the more demoralizing things I've ever been through. And I'm a recovering drug addict.
But you did it. You put your big girl pants on.
I did it. But I will say, I understand why it's so intimidating and why you can feel so frustrated. And we went through during a time when our lender was kind of like, I don't know how to tell you this, but someone with a good credit score and is actually, and who can come in with X amount of money, is actually going to be penalized as someone than a worse credit score and less money that they can put down. I'm like, what is that? And it's not necessarily, it's legal because it's not necessarily race-based discrimination. It's financial-based.
It's merit-based discrimination. They don't want the people to be successful. They want you to own nothing. This is what I'm saying. Once you start thinking and seeing this stuff, you will see this popping up everywhere. The government wanted to make it easier for people with good credit to buy homes. They would not be penalizing you, but they're incentivizing the people who shouldn't, who will fail, because we've been through
Default.
this before, will
Yeah.
default, who will never want to go through that again because it will cause them a lot of pain, and that will reverberate through the system.
Yeah.
It's so backwards. It's such a backwards time. So,
Yeah.
but good for you for getting through that, and doing the hard work there and putting yourself and your family on that path. It's amazing. I'm so proud
Yeah,
of
we
you.
kind of had to make a choice because everyone was like, well, you can wait because we're coming out of the lowest rates in history and we got a higher rate. But I was like, I waited till after that boom when everyone was paying way over, because I was basically like, well, you date the rate. I don't want to be stuck with a house that's $200,000 valued, basically overvalued, and I'll be stuck with forever. If the rates come down, I can refinance. So at least there's some leeway. And perhaps I was incorrect, but I
I mean,
didn't.
here's the thing. Let's just say it did come down $100,000, right? But you're still putting money into the house instead of paying it to someone else. So you're still going to have more at the end of the day than you would otherwise. I say this a lot of times. This is a really important takeaway. There's what makes financial sense theoretically, and there's also what makes sense behaviorally. And so there are things like, oh, well, if you did this and you did all these complicated maneuvers, you'd get a much better rate and you'd make more on your money if you did things. But like you said, it's complicated and people can barely get their head wrapped around things, and they're not going to do this. So if you do something and maybe there was a better financial option that you weren't going to do, don't compare it against that. Compare it against the other thing, the throwing the rental money out the window each month. You know what I'm saying? So like you're still in a better position building equity, building something that you can hold on to even better, than what you were doing before, even though it may not be on paper the best thing that could happen, because just behaviorally people won't do those things.
Right, right. Yeah, behavioral economics is fascinating to me because we really don't make sense at all. And there's something to be said too. There are houses we were looking at that we were considering buying that were going for $250,000 more than what they were going for the year before, than what we were, and they were selling than what we were looking at. And even if I had wanted to, I couldn't have put a down on that. So it's
And you shouldn't, because again, it has to be within your range, because if you put a down payment on something and then you can't make it happen, and then not only do you put yourself in a place to lose that money, but then you create this bad experience and you're not going to want to do that again. So you have to
yeah,
right size, and I think that's important. We have these stretch goals, but do what you can. If you can't afford that 2,500 square foot house, maybe it's a 1,200 square foot house. Like, start with whatever is in your purview, and then you can always change and work from there. But at least you'll have something. You'll have that ownership to fall
yeah,
back on.
yeah,
And if you're not someone who knows how to do derivatives and invest in the stock market, do all these fancy things that are going to get you these supposed returns, what else are you doing with the money? If you're going to be spending it, or if you're going to be throwing it away in some other consumable fashion, wouldn't you rather have that nest egg and own something? So it's a different mindset, but it's an important one, and it's become even more important because all the people we talked about don't want you to do that, because the more that you're dependent, for example, on the government, the more power they have and the better it is for them. So if they can lock you into student loans that they can then tease to forgive for you, even if they can't do it, that's better for them than just helping to make college more affordable by getting the government out of lending and forcing colleges to have some skin in the game. So
yeah. Oof. Well, Carol, where can we find you in your book?
So, as we talked about, you could try to find me on Twitter at Carol JS Roth. You may or may not see me. It kind of depends on the day, but set a notification. That way, theoretically, you might see me more often. The book, You Will Own Nothing. Hard copy is available wherever you get your books. Amazon is great for rankings if you like to support small business, your local small business bookstore, bookshop.org. But I really hope everyone will consider not only buying a hard copy to get yourself in that, that mindset we talked about, but this is critically important knowledge. Like, I feel like all of my books are important, but this one in particular has so much value for you in shifting the way that you go through what are going to be some really big changes in the way that Americans live their lives. And hopefully what came through is that I want you to succeed. I want you to own as much as possible. I want you to seize the American dream. So hopefully that will give you the roadmap to do so.
Well, thank you. You're always welcome back on our show. We love having you. And I appreciate all of the writing and what you do for the world, whether the world realizes it or not.
Well, thank you. Love you back. And as your audience know, you're the ultimate mensch. You're so giving and thoughtful. And I'm just thrilled to have you as a friend and also a thought leader in the world.
Oh, gosh. Thought leader. Blah.
A benign thought leader, a humorous thought leader.
I'm like, please don't follow my thoughts.
You have good ones, even though they're self-deprecating.
Thank you. It's time for the weekly check-in with Bridget and cousin Maggie. Okay. It is check-in time.
We never know what's going to come out in the check-in. We're always like, what should we talk about? I don't know.
Yeah. My ex-husband died.
Yeah. It's really sad.
It's been a weird thing. It'd be a weird check-in if I didn't mention that.
Yeah.
It's weird too because he was on life support for 2 weeks. So I've been dealing with it for 2 weeks, but it's so strange. I've never had that experience, and I have a lot of empathy now for people who do have the experience of having a loved one on life support, because it's this strange purgatory. Like the first week, it was that shock and I grieved a lot and it was terrible. And then you get the news that like, oh, we're waiting for these tests to see if they're going to be legally declared brain dead. And then there's like enough of an activity that you can't. And so I almost like shelved my grief.
Yeah.
I basically put it on a shelf and was like, I can't deal with you right now. And so even your grief is in purgatory.
Right. You can't just, because you were like, I don't know, maybe a miracle will happen. And
although it's unlikely,
but you're like,
still, you retreat into like magical
that,
thinking.
Like, what if we're sitting around with him one day being like laughing about the time he almost died? And,
I kept like expecting that to happen. And I think that's the kind of danger of the purgatory of life support, is that you retreat into magical thinking, because as long as, and this is the thing I realized when he actually did pass, is that as long as he hasn't passed, there's like still a chance you can see them again. Mm-hmm. And once they're dead, there isn't. So there's still like, so you're saying there's a chance,
right?
It's still just like
it's very
a little
human
sliver of, but it's not necessarily healthy because it's not real.
But I think it's very human. I think it's just a human reaction.
Like life support is not human.
No, it's not.
That's the weird thing. That is technology interrupting a process.
Yeah.
And it is, you also go through like all this weird stuff where you're like, are they fighting? Can they hear me?
Right.
Like his,
is he aware?
Was he aware? Does he know that is he in purgatory waiting for us to let him go?
Right.
Are we keeping him stuck?
Right.
Like,
is he
and
just
it can
gone
change like
already? Yeah.
Is he gone already? But I go into like this Native American thing where it's like, is he searching the land for his, like, is he stuck here because his body
is still?
Yeah. I wonder if Judaism or certain religions don't allow for life support.
Some of them don't.
If they're just like, pull that plug, their spirit's gone. Like I started getting very esoteric about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it doesn't help. Our grandfather, when we were kids, they planned his funeral 3 times.
Or existential. Is that the word I'm looking for?
Maybe.
I started
existential about it.
I started getting existential about it and having, they planned his funeral how many times?
3 times. He almost died like literally 3 times when we were young, when we were kids. And that's when he was really, really sick. They called him Lazarus. Like he literally came back from the dead. So it's not like there's no even kind of personal anecdote stories of that we would laugh about it, in our family about like, oh, remember the time grandpa almost died?
Yeah, which made me really have a tendency to want to believe that this was the case in this instance too. And you also start like Googling, these random stories of people who were called, like you can find these stories, they exist, where they were declared kind of pretty much brain dead and then they woke up or came back. And that's not the majority though.
No, it's not. It's a very, very, very.
And it's usually there's something weird, like there was swelling in the brain, not like there was no oxygen to the brain for a long time. And then you think of the alternative, and this is what my therapist and my father kind of pointed out, was they both knew people who did come off life support, and they were like, they usually wish they were dead.
Oh,
because they can't talk, they have to relearn everything, they have very low functioning. And I'm like, oh yeah, you don't even think about that.
No, you just assume they're going to be like they themselves were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that you're condemning them to some sort of like alternate reality.
Yeah, no, it was very, at least now I feel like I can grieve.
Right.
I can like process what happened instead of kind of putting it in purgatory. But even grief is so weird. It is so like the cliche thing of I'll be driving or I'll be like in the grocery store and suddenly it just hits over you like a wave. And even though we've been, oh God, we were such like crazy kids when we got married. It's been a long time. We were still friends and
you kept in touch.
Feel so bad for his kids. He has kids. They're little. Hold on 1 minute.
Yeah.
Can you pause it?
We just had to take a break for a phone call, and now we have no idea what we were talking about.
We were in the middle of a very deep conversation about life or death, and then I had to take a phone call about life or death, and now I have no recollection of what we were talking about.
No.
I mean, I remember, but I don't remember where we were.
No, like where we were. I feel like we were headed somewhere interesting.
We're headed somewhere great. Now I'm focusing on why my Twitter is broken.
Because you're only focused on the things you can control.
I can't control that either.
No, I know.
That's the funny thing. I was journaling about all this the other night. I hadn't journaled in so long, and I'm like, I should probably write down, so long that I hadn't even journaled about my friend Chris passing away. And so I was like, oh, before I mention this other person who hadn't passed away yet, but was about to, I should probably talk about this other person that passed. It's been so much grief and young people dying in the past year.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I was journaling about it and I started kind of catching up with like all of the people who died and life and being grateful, and then started talking about financial insecurity and work, and ended up finding myself talking about my frustration with Twitter and like analytics and stuff. I was like, isn't this amazing? Like, even this is why spirituality is so hard, because even in the course of one journal entry that I'm in control of writing, by the end of it, I'm focusing on minutia that I have no control over and doesn't really matter.
Right. And it's just going to drive you crazy.
And I literally, on the other page of that journal entry, were like, all that matters are that my family is healthy, my daughter is healthy,
right?
I'm fine right now, I have enough.
Big picture,
and like lost that.
So grateful for the life I have.
And lost it in the course of one journal entry.
That's nuts. No, I really liked your newsletter from the other day too, because we were talking about this right before we started recording.
That's the human experience.
Yeah. And how you were like, when I'm not being spiritual and I'm not connected, I start worrying about, the analytics and the clicks and all of this stuff. But it's such a like brain worm. Because you're sitting there trying to grow your business and all that stuff matters. And then you're sitting there being like, what's happening?
And it is actually gonna drive me crazy. I feel
this is why you need to get back into stand-up though, because I feel like that's one of your saving graces, is you just go like rant about all the shit that's driving you crazy. And Dumpster Fire helps with that too.
Dumpster Fire helps. The book is helping too. I've been thinking about things that give me the joy that I feel. again, when I'm in the process, I feel fine. This is why people hire people for social media and all that crap. Because when I'm in the process of making all of this, making Dumpster Fire, joy. Writing, joy.
Recording an
interview, joy. I forget that and then when it's like someone's like, what are your analytics and how many impressions and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I want to kill myself.
I know. And that's a problem too, is that both of us feel that way. Like in a lot of respects, we balance each other's strengths and weaknesses in terms of like what our abilities are and what we're good at doing for the company. But neither one of us has that skill. And
what skill?
The social media skill.
I used to have that skill.
But like some people love it. Some people love the shit out of it, enjoy it, and like do it for their jobs.
Nobody loves it.
Some people do.
Even people who do don't love it. There's no way to love it. It's a soulless, horrible endeavor.
Well, that sounds like a judgment.
No one loves this.
Some people get a thrill of it and they love the challenge and they think it's like a game and they love to gamify it and all of this stuff.
Mr. Beast.
So there's people out there who love it.
Yeah.
So it's neither one of our, it doesn't fit into either one of our strengths, which is sad.
We actually don't, there's a lot of things that we don't have that like we're two in common. Mm-hmm. I should fire you. This is the check-in.
Or you're like, Maggie's
where
gone.
I realize that Maggie is not the right person for my team.
After
what am
like
I doing?
20 years. No, we do have a lot of stuff that's in common.
Who has some video skills and knows social media.
But I'm good at organizing and keeping all the shit trains on tracks and all that stuff. It's like the operational stuff. We need a tech guy and we need a social media guy.
You don't need to interview for your job. I know what you're good at.
Well, you said you were going to fire me. Now I'm worried I'm going to be left homeless on the streets of Austin. You're going to kick me out of the house and be like, take your small dog and go.
You and that dog wouldn't survive in this heat.
No, we wouldn't. Not in 20 minutes.
Surviving. You'd get fried.
No, I'm so white. I would burn into a cinder.
It'll be fine. We do need a video person, though.
Uh-huh.
Someone who knows how to use a camera, which I used to do. And then now all of those skills have left my brain. I actually had that skill set had I continued working the muscle.
That's the thing. I mean, I know you were into photography at one point in your life.
Yeah, but it was pre-digital. Mm-hmm. So I know the basics of photography, but I don't know how to use any of these new cameras because all of mine were old school. Mm-hmm. So sure, I know what aperture is and I know what depth of field is and I know how to figure out how to get good lighting and a good shot. And I could not tell you how any of it works on a digital camera.
Yeah.
So it's less about understanding it. It's more just knowing how to actually work the actual camera, which I'm sure I could do if I watched a YouTube video or something. It's more just like, where do I find this? Right.
I mean, I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos. Usually YouTube is like just the saving grace. It's like, if you don't know how to do something, you fucking YouTube it, you figure it out. And that's how I've learned to do half the shit that I know how to do.
Yeah. But for some reason, the answers to our problems on that camera do not exist on YouTube.
I know.
Well, yeah. This check-in was kind of like my journal entry.
All over the place.
It ended with me firing Maggie.
Yeah, we went from spiritual life and death to
analytics.
Once again.
The drudgery of YouTube.
Oh, life imitates
I'm going to write
Bridget's journal entry.
My next journal entry is going to be the tyranny of YouTube.
YouTube is a tyrannical
It does
place.
Feel like everything is broken.
Yeah.
On the internet. It feels like the internet is broken.
Well, it's all these, now that I've seen Leighton Woodhouse's and Jacob Siegel's podcasts, I'm like, oh, it's all the freaking dragnets. We're just caught in like 20 dragnets of shit that keeps us from growing. It's like information suppression.
Yes. The information.
That's what I keep telling myself.
Must be suppressed at all costs.
Because otherwise we just suck, and we keep coming back to that too.
I'm going to make those t-shirts.
It's
I'm
not
just
the
trying
algorithm.
I'm trying to decide it should be first person or second person.
We just suck or you just suck.
It's not the algorithm I just suck, or it's not the algorithm you just suck.
We could do both. We could do a version of both. You can.
I'm going to have a limited edition one just for me. And I'm going to make the second person version for everyone else.
We need to make a yacht for every pleb t-shirt too.
Yeah, I think that I think that Constance is moving.
Yeah, I know. I think she's in the middle of it, isn't she?
Yeah. Everyone will be settled down for the just the tip heading into the election cycle.
Oh, I haven't. Why'd you bring that up? I like to block that out of my mind as much as possible.
Aren't you excited for it?
I'm excited for the dumpster fires. That's for sure.
I was working exactly. What's bad for America is good for dumpster fire. I was working on a new intro for my 7th iteration of a book I'll never write, and and I was writing about where we are right now in this moment, and I'm like, we're on the heels of one Trump presidency, heading into what could be another Trump presidency. Like at the dawn of another one.
It's such a strange time.
It's such a strange time. But I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it feels like everyone's more and more disconnected. I don't know if that's just me.
Like in what way?
Like everything's becoming more fractured.
You mean in terms of politics or just in general life?
Just in general, I don't know.
Like social media kind of life?
I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. It's just a sense that I can't.
Like
siloed.
Yeah. Like we're not seeing the Trump insanity we were seeing when he first started running.
No, I just feel like, and maybe it's just summer, but it just feels like everyone's, I don't know how to articulate it.
Do you think they're just out living their real lives?
Maybe.
Like touching grass and hopefully being in the real world?
How can they be? The planet is burning.
Well, there's that.
This is a very uplifting check-in with Bridget Phetasy.
Maggie gets fired and we're all going to die.
And my ex-husband did just die.
Oh, God. It's true.
I only laugh because I want to cry.
It's the only thing you can do. Cry and laugh and cry again. And then laugh some more.
These check-ins are getting very sad. Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank our composer, Jared Elias, my co-producer and cousin, Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.